So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Book Club of California's program for Monday, July 10th. This is a live in-person program, also being streamed on Zoom, and it's the online and in-person exhibition opening and a program titled 50 Years in the Making, a reprise by John A. Lehner of the 1970 Decorative Designers Exhibition. Thank you again for joining us here in the book club rooms and on Zoom. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to MC the beginning of tonight's program. Tonight, we have about 32 or so folks registered to join us here in person, and about 90 folks registered to join us on Zoom. So for those of you who might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and so much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members and our donors. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join, to find out more, or to donate to the book club. So before we start, please know that we want to make sure that attendees have time to view the exhibition. But if you're joining us here in the club room or on Zoom, we will also have time to take questions after a brief presentation. So if you have questions for our speaker, please use the chat and the Q&A function in Zoom. And if you're here in the room, you'll be able to wave your hand and we'll call on you. Now, to introduce tonight's speaker and our program, please welcome former book club board member and member of the Roxburgh Club of San Francisco, the Grolier Club, and the Colophon Club, and the proprietor of Swan's Fine Books, Laurel Swan.
He's making me blush, oh my goodness. As Kevin said, I'm Laurel Swan of Swan's Fine Books. And it is my distinct pleasure to be here with you this evening and introduce our speaker for the evening, John Lehner. John was born in Chicago. He took both his bachelor's and his master's degrees at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, both degrees in electrical engineering. He entered the aerospace industry in 1964, a very exciting time to enter that industry, and traveled around the world to support satellite launches. John is a collector's collector. I asked him once for a list of what he collects. It's not just books. And he went away, came back the next day with a list, and about yay long. And I took the list, I said, that's not bad. He said, oh no, that's a list of what I don't collect. It was much shorter than the list of what he does collect. He's been collecting books for 57 years. He was a founding member of the Colophon Club. He was a member of the Roxburgh Club for many years, and John has been a member of the Book Club of California this year for 50 years. John likely, in my opinion, and the opinion of others, has the most extensive collection of trade bindings in private hands. We estimate he currently has about 5,500 bindings in his collections, and then, of course, illustrators and fine press books. Tonight, John is going to speak with you about a portion of his collection, that done by the firm, the Decorative Designers. So welcome, John.
Thank you. There's a lot there that I'd forgotten about. So we have another slide. So why the Decorative Designers? This goes way back to 1964 when I got out of school. With my new wife, we moved to LA. And while I had my job at Nortronics on top of Palos Verdes Peninsula, she found a job at a small ad agency. The art director there got to know her, and he was interested in Tiffany lamps. And so because he was interested, then she wanted to be interested. And then that got me having to learn about Tiffany lamps, and turns out Art Nouveau as well. I did find the Dr. Koch book on Tiffany, and there was a lot of Art Nouveau stuff in there. So I started looking through antique shops for anything that bared some resemblance to Art Nouveau. And after a while, after having found some, I thought, well, wonder if books had anything to do with Art Nouveau on the covers. So by 1966, I had found about 18 inches of books on one shelf. That's how it all started. There were Margaret Armstrong bindings, of course, and lots of others I didn't know what I was looking at. She was working at the UCLA school library, or the library school. And so I got to use her ID to get into the research library, where I found out an upcoming exhibit put up by Gullins and Espy in 1968. So there was an awesome number of Margaret Armstrong bindings, and there was a checklist, and I got that. I forgot my camera, so I didn't have any pictures of the books. In 1907, they put together another exhibition of all the major book designers that they knew about. And there were some, including books signed DD. Well, in one of these books, there was a end paper design, sort of a countryside looking thing, signed by some guy named Arthur Covey. And he used the words DD underneath it. So unfortunately, that meant that all of the DD books in that exhibition were given to Arthur Covey, a minor designer who disappeared shortly after. Herbert Pleiss of Boston, an early collector, he got in touch with Gullins and Espy, and he told them that the DD was a firm, had not much to do with Arthur Covey. And that set them on a quest to find out more about the decorative designers. So who were the decorative designers? So still part of who the decorative designers were. The last book that I found from that exhibition is called The Dread and Fear of Kings. It was sort of a ghost thing, because I'd hear about a dealer who had one, then I never could find him. I got one good lead on ABE. I ordered the book. I never heard anything from the dealer. And then a couple of years passed by, and we're getting up towards the 50-year anniversary. And one day it popped up. So I bought it. Turned out it was a different color. It's red with some yellow instead of the blue with lighter blue. So I like this one better anyway. So planning for the 50-year golden anniversary, there is a little pun there because there are so many gold bindings seem to fit. Not to happen though, because the pandemic hit, and so everything shut down. And I have to thank BCC for hosting the exhibition for all you guys to enjoy. So who are the people behind this? Well, let me just say up front, though, that Lee Thayer is the major designer for all the books. There are exceptions. Henry Thayer did a few, but Henry Thayer did mostly lettering. And the Kleist call to Gullin Espy about the DD firm set off a series of conversations with Lee Thayer. Found out she was in a retirement home in San Diego. So they arranged a meeting with her for about 2 days. They went down there with a carload of books for her to look at. And she was able to look at them. And since she was in her 90s, maybe, you know, some of the things she said she didn't follow very well, but she definitely would look at a book and say, no, we didn't do that. That's not our style. So the fact is that I looked through the oral histories at UCLA and got a printout of their conversations over 2 days. And she was remarkable. I mean, she was actually naming, well, Jay Chambers probably did that one. I certainly did that one. So all the books that they had brought to her that she blessed as DDs, even though they weren't signed, are appeared right here. These were all checked against her memory. She also had a bunch of material from her own archive of things she saved when she worked back there. And they were in a separate building. I'm not sure why they were in a separate building, but I never got to see them because I never went over that building. Either I didn't know about it. I think it was probably security, since they were her things they wanted in a smaller venue. So she herself said that she was responsible for about 25,000 cover designs and dust jackets. That's include dust jackets as well. And she did the design sketches, and then she would turn it over to some of the lesser figures that worked for the firm, and they would bring them to the fruition. Henry Thayer was trained as an architect, and he likely started designing covers, moonlighting as it were, in late 1880s and early 1890s. Of course, this is just my theory, but that was mainly for Harper and Sons. When he needed help with this budding business of his, he went to Candace Wheeler, co-founder of the Associated Artists, who worked for Tiffany, to complete the decorating of the mansions that he had been hired to do. And they supplied fabrics and wallpapers and stuff like that. And he suggested that get in touch with Emma Reddington Lee, that's E.R. Lee, who at the time was painting murals 6 feet by 9 feet. And so when he wanted her to do little book covers, she said she thought it would be very hard work to work on such a small canvas. So as I mentioned, Henry was responsible for most of the lettering and devoted most of his time to sales, promotions, and business matters. I might think one of the things I read in that oral history was they came up on tough times that once in a while, and they had a retainer from Hollister Mills, that's the cloth company. And if it wasn't for that retainer, they would probably have gone broke. So that helped them a lot. There were other art students that they hired over the years. Rome Richardson spent about 2 years working for them. They went off on his own. He did some really great covers, signed RR. Jay Chambers was employed until 1919. That's probably the longest employee, mainly designing figures. I only have one book that looks like a D&D cover, but it's signed JC, so he probably did one on his own. They added additional artists, but they worked in the background doing supporting work. Like if she had a repeat pattern, she would give them the repeat pattern and they would just reproduce it all over the place. She would connect it together along with the lettering. So the last thing I wanted to say about Lee Thayer was that when she was done with the design work, she started writing mystery novels in 1919 and eventually published 60 books through 1966, the age of 92. I can't remember the name of the detective, but he's not Sherlock Holmes. So this next thing, we're going to talk about 8 out of the 13 books that are here that were not in the exhibition. So It's been a long time since that exhibition, and I've been collecting for a long time. And so the 13 here represent probably things that the Gullens and Espy never saw. It took me, like I say, 50 years to gather all these things together. So the first book is called The Violet Flame. And some of you may have recognized the name Fred T. Jane. He's only wrote one novel, and he's noted for Jane's fighting ships and other military books over the years. So if you're collecting his books, this would be kind of like one of the things you'd like to have to top off your collection of Jane's fighting material. It's also a split font design. You see that the silver part changes to gray towards the bottom. And I guess there's several ways of saying it, but I call it the split font printing technique. They divided the fount where the ink is held into sections and put different inks in the sections. They let it dribble on the platen, and then a roller comes up and it blends them together. And when it gets to be where they want it to be blended, they then stop rolling it and they transfer that stuff. Probably another roller comes into play, and then they ink the block and then it's stamped. So after you keep doing that, the blending changes. They have to stop, clean everything off, and start all over again. So these are very expensive processes. Do them. They're beautiful when they work. And unfortunately, you don't see that many of them. I have about a dozen in 50 years. Not a whole lot, is it? So book 2 is a double cover design. And the same design is used on a dust jacket. So the DD firm did covers for the author, several of them. And probably the best known one is called Shadowing. Excuse me. However, the dust jacket for that one is the same design, except on the flowers on the dust jacket, they use silver ink, which is probably just aluminum. Whereas the book doesn't have the silver. I can't answer why that is. Book 3. Dragon's Blood by Henry Rideau. I call it a striking poster style design. Yes, the red and blue ink are used for the dragon. I guess the red is fire stuff coming out of its nostrils. I like the fact that the gold disc is off center and it leaves more room for the dragon and plenty of room for the lettering in red, which sounds good for blood, right? Dragon's blood. And unfortunately, this one early on caused me to start collecting dragon covers. So I guess it's important. Book 4 is a spectacular 2-volume set. Mustard cloth with dust jacket, just has gold lettering on the spine. The repeat pattern is undulating spiky leaves. And it turns out I'm now convinced that it's likely based on thistle leaves, because she did another couple with the same leaves going up and then the thistle blossoms are up on the side. I've seen these forms on several of her books, so I've decided that it's probably her favorite natural thing to use as a motif. If you look where these guys are in the cases, you'll see that the back cover on one of them, on both of them, have a large fancy bee using even some of the same spiky stuff. And the factor that is notable, I mean, I have another set of these, slightly different color. And on that set, there is no bee on the back cover, which is really strange. I can't explain that. So we get number 5. It's a very large book, as you can see, it almost wants to tip over in that case of it, but it's not tipped over yet. It's very early, and it's one of the larger ones. It has Henry Thayer's early lettering, the features there that are specific to his lettering styles. And I wrote an article, was in Trade by Newsletter years ago, and talked just about his early lettering styles. And if you'll notice, you probably can't see it there, but the monogram, the DD monogram, is the early one where it's a very shapely, rounded DD, very clear. And I'm not sure who designed that, but it didn't last. As time went on, the DD got smaller and smaller and splodgy, not beautiful. So this big guy is one of 3 with the same design. And the first one says, famous homes of Great Britain. Then the next one was more famous homes. And the third one, other famous homes. All the same. But I think these were spread, probably, I'm not sure, you'd have to look at the card. But the early one is 1899 or a little bit earlier. Second one, 1900, and the third one is 1902. Book 7, that's the next one, is huge. It's sitting over there. It's one of the largest of the DD signed covers that I've found. It's you can find the DD in the lower right corner. It's not real obvious. The lettering is very much mature lettering of Henry Thayer, Roman capitals. And he also used these little dingbat triangles. I guess some people call them fleurons. I call them dingbats. If you see those on a cover, you can almost rest assured it's by Henry. There's a sort of a symmetrical design about it. It gives me an all over arts and crafts feeling. And I did find it at an antiques, arts and crafts antique show. I had seen it 2 years in a row. And so I told the guy, I said, you don't really want to drag this big hunky thing back on again, do you? So I made him an offer and I couldn't refuse. So number 8 is the book on Pearl and its history. This is probably the best copy you'll ever see because the pink pearls are embossed, and so they get rubbed. And so most times you would see it, it's rubbed. And they use bright and matte gold to their usual great effect. And despite the size, the monogram is small. In summary, I have poured over the recordings of Lee Thayer, Charles Gullins, and John Espy, held in 1970 before the November DD exhibition at UCLA. None of these 8 books were mentioned, so I assume Gullins and Espy missed these major works of the book cover art. They turned up during the 50-year search for the 61 books on the exhibit. But you have to wonder if they did 25,000 books, and I'm only covering hundreds at most. What else is out there in that 25,000 that we haven't seen? I mean, I expect to see more treasures. Just look. The exhibition includes at least 2 Century Company yearly Christmas gift books. Those are those 2 biggies over there, Egypt and the Near East. And they did one of these for every year, except when they got to 1908, there wasn't one. So I have looked through the Century periodicals because they usually serialized the stories before they published the book. And I've not seen anything remotely like what would be, say, a good subject for 1908. So while I was putting this collection together, I finally realized that the Book of the Pearl fills the gap. It's 1908. So, I mean, this would be a great coffee table book if there was any coffee tables to put it on. So lastly, Christmas Christmas in July, special treat for you guys. I found some years back a Harper's magazine in great condition, and it was signed by Lee Thayer, and she used the DD monogram. It was unseen by Goins, unseen by Epstein, it's unseen by me until I found a copy of this magazine. And it does say, it doesn't say I'm a Reddington Lee Thayer, but it does say E.R. Lee Thayer. So you're all seeing it for the first time. I don't think anybody has ever known about this thing, because these periodicals just don't turn up these days. That's it. Guys, before I go away, I really like to thank this guy and this gal and Jackie in the back there for putting this thing all together.
Don't go anywhere. Stay right here.
I'm holding on to this thing.
Because we're going to see if there's any questions from any folks here in the room. Do we have any questions? Randy.
Hi, John. Great talk. So we're trying dust jackets that were done by the DD outfit. So are these, in your experience, the exception, or do you think that a lot of them had dust jackets? And did they typically just mimic the design of the binding onto the dust jacket, or are there cases where they're totally different designs?
I've tried to answer that question over the years by buying everything I could afford with a dust jacket.
I want you to get right in the camera.
All right. So, I mean, who saved dust jackets back then? And so they got tattered and people threw them away. So I can't answer the question, did they all have dust jackets when they were issued? Dust jackets go way back into the 1800s. So you could assume that they would, they would have it. But I have some where they just took a plain piece of paper, wrapped it around the book. It's got a little thing, one of the ornaments on the spine and the title. And the cover just has just the lettering. And they didn't use the rest of the dust jacket to advertise any other books. There's no list of books at the back that the publisher did. It's just a piece of paper to save the cover. And that cover is in this, I think it's called, no, it's not in there, I'm sorry. It's part of another series of books. Some of them had dust jackets with designs on them. But out of the whole series of some 55 books, I think I've only found about 4 with dust jackets. So some people hold dust jackets in awe and they want tons of money for them.
But interestingly, to follow up on Randy's comment, what did Lee Thayer say about the advent of the dust jacket?
Well,
The
the
decorated dust jacket.
dust jacket killed their business overnight. And Gullins used to say it was 1910. The bottom, everybody got laid off. I think there were still things going on. And she converted to making dust jackets as part of the business plan. And so the company didn't close until 1932. And then she was already writing novels by that time. And you can find her dust jackets on the books. And some of them do have some stamping on the bindings. But her since the murder mysteries, the dust jacket designs are always lurid. Daggers and blood and skulls and stuff like that. I have about 5 of them. She did 60 of them. I'm not ready to go out and spend money like that for all of them. I think I have some pictures of each of those that she did. Somebody sent me them years ago. They must have been a collector.
There's a great question on Zoom that asks about what was the training of these artists. Can you tell us anything about how these artists were trained? And what do you think influenced their style?
Well, I think the influencing of the style is what came out of Lee Thayer's head. And they were in a supporting position. Like I said, if she had to do a repeat pattern, she'd work the design out and they would just repeat it 100 times if necessary. Most of the people, there were art students that they hired straight out of school or even part-time. As far as I know, all the people they hired were art students. So they would have had an education in art at the time.
We'll go over here.
Do you have a sense of the designer's relationship with the publishers that they work for regularly? Did a publisher request a specific designer or did they commission the firm?
Well,
How regular a relationship was that?
let me talk a little bit about the thing that makes the DD firm unusual. And that was Henry's idea that he would provide a service to the publisher. And first thing he did was he signed an agreement with Hollister Mills. They would only do Hollister Mills cloth. For that, they paid him a stipend, the retainer. They also basically told the publisher, "You give us the book, we'll read it, we'll come up with the design. We'll give you a mock-up of what it's going to look like." In other words, they took a piece of cardboard, they covered it with cloth. They used paint to supply the colors, the actual colors. I don't know how they did the gold. Maybe they used black ink for the gold. Lee Thayer said certain kind of gold she would shade in the areas of that. So they took this over to the publisher, and if he liked it, they just took it to the bindery. And I think they worked with the binder to execute these things. The blocks were cut, engraved, and they were put in the machines and stamped. So what did the publisher have to do? All he had to do was give a nod. Yes, it's a one-stop, production. Nobody was doing that. Publishers had to arrange all this stuff themselves, so he did it all for them.
So the difference between a DD cover and a Margaret Armstrong cover would be what for the publisher?
A world, for Margaret Armstrong, she's working with herself. She's got to go to the publisher, she's got to go to the mining, she's got to do all this stuff herself. Where did she get the cloth? How did she do that? What about who supplied the inks? Who printed anything that needed ink? So we don't know anything about what she was doing, but she was doing it alone. She had her sister to help her with figures and stuff, but nobody else. Who else could have done 25,000 books, titles over all those years? Most of them, at most, did 300 copies. I think Frank Hazenplug probably did a lot more than that, but I don't have the Frank Hazenplug, so I can't tell you how many he did.
John, were the Decorative Designers Group part of a corporation, a company, or was it just a designation that they used for the product they were producing?
No, they were a company. He started the business. So, he's a businessman. He's an architect. So he started a business providing this kind of stuff. I've seen some letters that he wrote to publishers, basically proposing, this is what I could do for you. And he listed in that letter, he listed about 10 other books that he had done recently, about 1896. So they could look up those books if they wanted to, check them out.
Did the company then formally go out of business?
Yeah, 32. My understanding was 32 went out of business. Somewhere in there, she divorced Henry Thayer.
We'll over here, and then we'll go over here.
John, do you think that they did more than that one magazine cover that you showed us?
I have quite a few magazine covers done by the decorative designers. They did a lot for Century. They would supply a border on the front, and there'd be lettering in there. And some of the issues, they actually did a painting that appears surrounded by the border. They also did illustrations to a few books, mainly children's books. But there's one book that Lee Thayer probably did the cover. She did the title page. She did the illustrations, and she has her name on the title page for all of that. That's the only one I have. Still any other.
We'll do one more question here.
How is this kind of work done now?
Well,
How do publishers get these covers
they
done?
generally don't do this kind of work. It's expensive. And they use photographic processes. They print on paper, glossy paper, sometimes plasticized paper. And they use machines to bind them. It's a whole different ballgame. Now, there may be some private press printers that want to explore, putting a stamping on a cover or something like that. But not in general. We're talking production of millions of copies of bestsellers, so you know they got to use machines for everything. Most of the time, on really a good book, they'll give credit to the DJ designer.
What were the edition sizes of some of these books?
Well, Way and Williams probably is one of the smaller ones, publishers, and they did 500. And I think if you sold 2,000 to one of the major publishers, that was practically a bestseller. And there are a few where you'll buy a book and they list, in the ad, they'll say, this book was, done this time, and another 10,000, and then another 10,000, and another 10,000. So we're talking big numbers, but not like millions.
Mhm. So what's your advice for someone who might want to get into collecting what you have spent the last 50 years collecting?
It can be done, but you have to really beat the bushes to get a bargain. There's a lot of knowledgeable people out there. Maybe I'm partly responsible for that.
So is it easy? I mean, I'm certain some of these titles might be easier to find than others, but in general, how hard is the work to do a collection like this?
I think if you went on eBay and spent 3 hours a night looking through page after page after page after books, and you found only one that worth buying, that's typical.
Mm.
I mean, I've had a couple of months where I bought 40 books. Some people don't believe that,
But someone would need to achieve your knowledge of how to tell a DVD cover without the monogram.
that's not easy. You just have to see a lot of books, get checklists of books that identify this stuff. There are things online, you just have to look for. There was a big book on Margaret Armstrong just published recently.
Mhm.
Everything is in there, even stuff that I put in there for possible Margarets. And
Ever since that book came out, the prices have doubled.
Oh, interesting.
I wouldn't be surprised. They were already getting pretty high.
So is the DD monogram, I mean, when I look around at the books here, it's like a 50-50 shot, right? Half have the DD and the other half don't.
30, 70.
37 of the 61, right? Or of the
Well,
74.
you can't apply it to this. This is
Yeah.
something somebody else put together. But
Right.
if you look at my collection, out of all those books, 30% of them have the
Hmm.
DD.
So we are giving you a checklist if you're here in the room, or if you're out there on Zoom and want the checklist in the exhibition guide, at least of what's here.
What is the definitive reference for decorative designers?
There isn't any.
Yet.
Why
Somebody- I'm not an author, I'm a collector. Add that to my list of what I don't do.
it's the Golems and Espy, did they put out any kind of list?
Yeah. They have a couple of articles that were published, and they published the Margaret Armstrong checklist.
Yeah, of
They
course.
updated it in 1991. And there's some new paths in collecting. There's an article by him there. I guess Frank Hazenplug and Sarah Whitman. There's not a lot of books been written. Yeah, it's just a lot of hard work and a lot of looking.
Well, we want to make sure people here in the room have a chance to see more of the exhibition now that you've heard the remarks from the curator of the exhibition, but we'll take two last questions. We'll do Greg first and then Peter.
Chuck, when and why did book designers start using signing their designs?
Well, there was a guy named John Feely who did Victorian bindings in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and he did sign JF. There are some modern designs signed JF, and he was long dead, so I don't know, somebody out there is using his initials. But their publishers like Harper and Company had a policy of not letting designers put their initials on the books until about 1898 at least. And they just have these attitudes. It's almost a modern thing, circa 1900 when people started getting signed. Now, Margaret Armstrong got hers signed in 1895, and she had to quit Harper's. Just bon voyage. You don't want to use my monogram, I'll go over to Scribner's, which she did. And she almost doubled the number of books she was doing every year when she went over to Scribner's. But yeah, there's a ton of initials that have been recorded with no knowledge of who they are. And so far, Gullins and Espy, lists of monograms, they have about 42 major designers where they have some idea of who they are, how many they did, what period were they active. That's about it.
Okay. Would you describe a few of the booksellers in your early years of collecting who were aiding and abetting your collecting?
Peggy Christian was one that I bought a book from. She had one on a top shelf. She didn't want people handling these decorative designs, so she put them on the top shelf. I had her climb the ladder 3 times before I bought the book. I thought it was too expensive. Margaret, I could get for 50 cents. This was $3.50. It was embarrassing. I mean, the poor woman had to climb the ladder 3 times before I bought the book. But she knew about the bindings. She knew Gullins and Espy, and so she was a good one to go for. But I found them everywhere, flea markets, what have you. There was a local flea market down in my neck of the woods, and I'm walking there one day, and I found Phantom of the Opera, a nice comic, cost me $4. It didn't have a dust jacket. That would be worth $25,000 today if you had that dust jacket.
Well, great. Let's wrap it up there, and a big round of applause, a big thank you for our presenter. And thank you for attending this Book Club of California program. I hope that you will consider joining us for our next program. It is this Wednesday, 2 days from now, July 12th. It's in Southern California. It's in Pasadena. It's an in-person presentation titled Ramona Memories, Tourism and the Shaping of Southern California. Our presenter is author Dedia DeLizer. That presentation will be recorded. So if you're not jumping on a plane and going down to Pasadena tomorrow, we will record it, and we should have it for you on our YouTube channel. You can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs, or using the link in any of the program emails that you might be getting from the book club. So thank you again for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again, either here in the club rooms or online on Zoom. Thank you.